Thank you. Excellent introduction, Catherine. So we want to focus a little bit on the media today. And I think on the back of the last 6 weeks and what we've witnessed in the last 3 years in Gaza with the genocide, the media's played an indispensable role. And I kind of want to just go through a few examples and kind of dissect the multidimensional way in which the media is complicit. Catherine already mentioned the way manufacturing consent, and there's so many different ways that the media sanitizes war crimes, dilutes war crimes, and effectively provides the cover and the smokescreen whilst the aggressors perpetrate these crimes. If we just go back, let's focus on we want to focus a little bit on the last 6 weeks in the war in Iran and Lebanon, as well as the continued pummeling of Gaza. And quite simply, it's an illegal war that was waged following the assassination of a leader of a sovereign country. That's one or two lines, which is exactly what happened, and yet that wasn't covered. That's not the way it was covered. I just want to run through a few examples to illustrate some of the ways in which the media covers throughout these crimes. So if we go back right to the beginning, the US and Israel strike on the school, which killed hundreds of Iranian school children. Now that was reported on the BBC website. It specifically said at least 153 dead after reported strike on a school, Iran says. That's the BBC website. Side by side with that was an article when Iran retaliated. And it said 9 dead in missile attack on Israel as Iran strikes region. So one's reported, one's unambiguous. There's linguistic caution in one, and the other one is clear-cut, and there's no doubt about it. And this was a consistent pattern. In that very strike, that it was noted as a missile attack on Israel, whereas the one that Iran, when Iran was the victim, it was very unambiguous. Very ambiguous. When Sky News visited the site of the attack, I watched the Sky News correspondent, and he was, very picturesque, very vivid, describing and very descriptive reporting. And it said, this is what Iran's rage looks like. It says Iran's attack flattened schools, homes, synagogues, etc. The BBC likewise visited the site of an attack and stood next to a residential block, explicitly saying it's a residential block. And saying this is a warhead packed with hundreds of kilograms of explosives. So again, very categorical, very direct. The Guardian, the same, in description of an Iranian attack, said Iranian barrages tore through southern Israel, extensive damage, warhead packed with 100 kilograms of explosives. So this kind of descriptive reporting wasn't a feature when Israel was pummeling Gaza, or Lebanon, or Iran. It's very, very detached. It's very passive. That's just a few examples of when Iran is striking Israel or retaliating. And we've kind of gone through some of the way that language is very clear-cut. I just want to go through a few examples of the language and how different it is when the crimes are being perpetrated by Israel. So Channel 4 News, supposedly progressive, independent, great outlet. When Israel invaded on the 3rd of March, their report said Israeli troops cross into Lebanon. Now that's not how you describe illegal invasion. That's not how you describe a violation of international law. But that's exactly what it was, and it wasn't described in that way. This was an invasion of a sovereign country, which was concurrent with the airstrikes that hadn't stopped, even though there was a ceasefire. Again, that wasn't a picture that was painted by the mainstream media. Yolande Nell, who's the BBC's correspondent, described this in several ways over the next few weeks as Israel invaded, without using the word invasion. She called it a ground move, she called it a defensive maneuver, she called it ground operation, every word under the sun except illegal invasion of Lebanon. A few weeks later, as Israel intensified its attacks, Matt Fry, Channel 4, this is how he described Israel's invasion. Israeli troops pushing into new parts of Lebanon in what the military called targeted and limited operations. Now that's basically seeing one thing with your eyes and describing it as something else. It's not limited, it's not targeted, it's wholesale, systematic annihilation. But Channel 4 didn't describe it in that sense. The Guardian, another example, and again, I'm specifically pinpointing these because these are supposed to be good media. They're supposed to represent better journalism, which obviously isn't the case. The Guardian's article on the 16th of March said Israel is going to expand its ground campaign. Lots of words in the article, lots of Israel says, Israel claims, etc., etc., and yet there was no room in the article for the words illegal, invasion, or international law, even though that's exactly what it's describing. And that's basically the crux of what the media does. People say they don't report it. They are reporting it, but they're reporting it. They're stretching the meaning of words. They're using mental gymnastics. They're just completely painting an alternative picture so that you don't connect the dots about what the reality is. One which I found striking was Sky News were panning to an attack on Beirut. So live footage of bombs being dropped on buildings and the the bulletin said, IDF is making intelligence-based strikes on Beirut. So this is whilst literally bombs are dropping on residential buildings. So this is how language works. Ethnic cleansing becomes forcible. Ethnic cleansing and displacement is reduced to fleeing and evacuation. Genocide is converted into war, and carpet bombing is rebranded as targeted and precise operations. To illustrate just how baked in this bias is, and I talk about what your eyes see and how you report it. Yes, about 3 days ago, obviously, we know that Israel sprayed Lebanon with 100 bombs plus in about 10 minutes, systematic carpet bombing. The Guardian's correspondent in Beirut filmed the footage and the aftermath and, plumes of smoke, the debris, the destruction of buildings. And he said Israel's hitting what he said is more than 100 targets. He's literally recording what is being hit. He's literally recording communities being destroyed, and he's reporting it, saying still using Israel's lines. That's one aspect which I think is really damaging, the way that they rebrand something entirely. But there's one other aspect which I call propaganda by omission. Now, in covering Lebanon, one of the most important aspects is the Dahiya Doctrine, which is basically an Israeli military doctrine which allows the wholesale systematic destruction of communities, the targeting of civilian infrastructure and civilians, and disproportionate force. The Israelis see that as a means to an end. They see that as completely justified to achieve their goals. Not once has this been mentioned by any of the news articles, not once by any of the journalists, not once by any of the broadcasters. This will provide so much important context as to what's really happening. But that's the reason that it's not included, because the media is not there to report, it's not there to inform, it's there to conceal, it's there to whitewash. If viewers and observers were told about the Dahiya Doctrine, they would immediately know what the strategy is in Lebanon. But the fact that it's omitted is deliberate, because they're not there to paint the full picture for you. Another aspect which I think is central to this, which makes all of this easy, is the dehumanizing culture at the heart of this, the pro-Israel bias within the newsrooms. Now, there was the jet that was brought down, the fighter jet, and the pilot that went missing, which was then obviously retrieved by the US. I was watching Sky News and a military analyst, and he started explaining about this and said, this really brings in the human dimension into this conflict. One pilot who's now missing, and he said, this is really poignant, it's really profound, and really brings out the human dimension. Bear in mind, in the weeks prior to this, how many civilians were killed, how many communities were flattened, how much bombs dropped on innocent civilians. That infamous picture of the little boy, who was his last picture as he was heading to school when the US and Israel bombed a school in Iran, apparently that didn't bring the human dimension. The countless children, the countless civilians over the last few years, we didn't hear the word human dimension. Last week, Sheila Fogarty was characteristically diluting and whitewashing, and we won't make it personal. She had Jonathan Friedland on, and they were speaking about how hard it is for Israelis as Iran is fighting them or claiming to be indiscriminately targeting them. And Jonathan Friedland started describing how hard life is for Israelis, and he started a sentence with saying, this is quite hard to imagine, and then said, they're waking up every single day, nearly a couple of times a night, with their children, taking them down to bunkers and into their shelters as they're being bombed. That to Jonathan Friedland was really hard to imagine, and Sheila Fogarty said, it's like the Blitz. Bear in mind, Palestinians in Gaza are being killed even in their tents. They have no homes, they have nowhere to go. Israel has the Iron Dome, they have sophisticated military protection as well as underground bunkers. Lebanon doesn't have that, Iran doesn't have that, Gaza doesn't have that. And yet that's the point at which Sheila Fogarty and Jonathan Friedland said, this is who we're going to humanize. Yesterday, Sheila Fogarty on LBC had somebody who was discussing the bombing of Lebanon. And he said, how could this get any worse? And do you know what she said? She goes, well, Israel's giving them warning. At least Israel's telling 1.5 million people that they're going to be bombed before they're bombed. This is the same person that was humanizing Israelis for being in bunkers, and yet at the same time wasn't able to even understand how hard, how traumatic it is for your entire community to be bombed. And she's saying, well, actually, you're still being warned before you're being bombed. So in other words, you're going to die in the most ruthless way, but at least you're getting a warning. And dehumanization is central to the way that the media operates, because it's very easy for them to look at these people in the Middle East as not as humans or not on the same depth of emotion as Israelis. It makes it so much easier to dilute, because then you can just say, oh well, they just died. You don't have to say that they've been killed. You don't have to say that it's carpet bombing. You don't have to say it's annihilation, it's genocide. It's just very easy to reduce it into something else entirely, because these people ultimately don't matter. And taken together, all of this is just illustrates how the media is fundamentally broken. The last section I want to emphasize is there is a recognition that the media is broken, but I think one aspect which is still a bit of a blind spot is The Guardian. And the BBC, it's very easy for people to say the BBC is broken. It's very easy for people to say there's profound decay at the heart of it. It's very easy for people to pinpoint Sky News, The Telegraph, The Times, LBC. I still feel The Guardian is just as bad. And the reason is because it stands and it's supposed to be the standard bearer of journalism. It's supposed to be the gold standard. It's supposed to be separate from the rest, but it's not. The BBC gets a lot of stick, rightly so. One of its headlines when Hind Rajab was killed, 355 bullets sprayed deliberately to kill a 5-year-old girl. The BBC's headline was Hind Rajab found dead. The Guardian's was exactly the same. The Guardian also said Palestinian girl found dead. So that just tells you they're operating from the same hymn sheet. The Guardian's coverage from the beginning has been diabolical. And it's just been, they've delivered a crash course in how to manufacture consent, how to water down crimes. Let's not forget November 2023, 1 month into the genocide, where 10,000 Palestinians had been killed, where Israel had said they're going to reduce Gaza to a city of tents, they're going to make a place where no human can exist. These are human animals and will be treated as such. And they carried that out with meticulous precision, exactly as they said. The Guardian's editor met with the former IDF chief of staff in his mission to cultivate support for Israel. And the subsequent coverage is an example of cause and effect. The Guardian is not there to provide the full picture. The Guardian is not there to provide a comprehensive idea about what's happening. They're there to deceive. The way that they've mangled the English language, the way that they've stretched the meaning of words to insulate Israel, to protect and provide that smokescreen so that people don't understand the depth of the brutalities. There was an article the other day which talked about the rise of illegal settlements, and the Guardian called it a construction binge. That's the language that the Guardian is using to describe war crimes, to describe violation of international law, to describe ethnic cleansing. And that's why I always say to people, the bottom line is that when we unpack the role of the media, it's indispensable to recognize just how complicit the Guardian is. They are active participants in this. The way that they've watered down crimes, the way that they've diluted crimes, the way that they've regurgitated uncritically Israeli IDF. Even in their reporting to this day, they still say that they're targeted strikes, control and command centers. The Guardian has played an indispensable role, and they hide behind this cover of being a progressive outlet. So yeah, I just think broadly, the whole of the media ecosystem is broken, but it's imperative to understand just how complicit the Guardian is as well. And it's not a left-wing progressive force. It doesn't engage in fearless, ruthless journalism. It conceals the reality. It mangles the English language, and it dilutes war crimes. And so ultimately, the last 6 weeks have demonstrated to us effectively being a crash course in when there is an illegal war, when there's a war of aggression, when there are acts of genocide or of ethnic cleansing taking place. The media have shown us exactly how they can cover it without covering it, how they can reduce war crimes on an epic proportion to simply, they can rebrand them as conflict, they can change carpet bombing and annihilation campaigns of erasure into targeted, limited operations. So when we talk about how we move forward and how we change the status quo that we've had to endure, all these wars that we're forced into, the role of the media has been indispensable. And it started, arguably, in terms of what was turbocharged, was the Gaza genocide. But since the coverage has been diabolical. They've doubled down. They haven't shown any remorse, and there will be more reckoning. The only thing that what they don't have is any integrity or any moral clarity, but they're very generous because the amount of evidence they've supplied for us for when the reckoning comes, that's the only thing we can thank them for. And the reckoning will come, and there will be a lot of journalists. There will be a lot of journalists who have played an indispensable role, who have liters of blood on their hands that will never wash.